Hello everyone, my name is Jocelyn, you may call me Joy, and today I am addressing the question that is on everyone's lips, it seems. Or at least it was the question that was on everyone's lips at the time when I was writing this script. Now, some things happened. So anyway, I want to address the question, what is a woman? Or more specifically and accurately, how do you define what a woman is? This question was inspired by this particular clip from the Dr. Phil show, which has been doing the rounds. In this clip, a couple of trans advocates debated infamous transphobe Matt Walsh, the infamous transphobic children's writer. And we will get to breaking down what happened a little bit. When asked, trans exclusionary hardliners such as the Matt Walshes, the Ben Shapiros and the Posey Parkers of the world will tell you that a woman, as defined by the dictionary and according to basic biology, is an adult human female. There are literally t-shirts available that say this, that are made to be deliberately trans exclusionary and also defensive. This is a very common tactic of modern TERFs who are defending the rights of women, as opposed to, what they're actually doing is attacking the rights of trans people. This seems to be a definition with some clear parameters at least. However, when talking about the complex social phenomenon that is gender, a simple dictionary definition lacks the nuance needed to tackle the question fully. And also, biology, not basic. It's complicated. Yes, most people will fall into clear definitions of male and female based on certain characteristics, such as chromosomes, hormone profile, gonads, genitals, and secondary sex characteristics. However, some blur these lines and have a mixture of both kinds of characteristics, either by birth, and these people are known as intersex, or by medical transition, and these people are of course known as transgender, but of course not all transgender people need to transition in order to be transgender. However, I'm not going to deny biology entirely, because there does seem to be a component of gender that is biological. Most people are cis after all. What is on the psychological level? What is, carried out by the mind? And what is the mind if not a series of electrical impulses carried out in the brain, a very real, very biological organ? Certain cadaver studies show that trans people who hadn't undergone HRT had brains that were more similar to their gender that they identified as rather than their biological sex, in the amounts of white matter and grey matter that appeared in their brains. However, these studies are not conclusive. They suffered from small amounts of participants, and the fact of the matter is that there is no male brain or female brain. That's not really what trans people should be claiming. It's just that there are typical amounts and typical traits that exist in most, not all, of the people's brains that you will come across. I'm saying that it's not a clear-cut thing. Biology is not clear-cut. It's always messy. We're looking at something that's not binary, but bimodal. Trans medicalists and the medical healthcare establishment in general rely on psychological interpretations of this biological model to assess trans people's needs for treatment. And for some, it's a desperate need that's fueled by crippling dysphoria. Downside for this is that anyone who wants this transition treatment has to jump through many hoops and barriers just to be seen as being actually trans. And of course, some trans people exist who don't experience dysphoria, who they experience this gender incongruence between what their body is telling them they are and what society is telling them are versus how they actually feel they are, without actually feeling majorly dysphoric, uncomfortable, psychologically traumatized by it. All I need to say is that the system is clogged and broken when it comes to healthcare for trans people, at least. And this helps no one. A recent attempt at appealing to the UK government to depathologise the trans condition as it exists within the population in order to open doors and streamline access to healthcare, trans treatment, has in fact backfired quite seriously. The idea was that by reforming the rules surrounding the GRA, the Gender Recognition Act, to depathologise transness as it exists would allow us easier legal self-identification and access to GRCs, gender recognition certificates, and also treatment, medical treatment. However, according to my source, those in charge decided that depathologizing meant demedicalizing altogether, and thus, if trans isn't a medical condition, well, you don't need medical intervention to treat it, which, isn't really what people were saying or wanted. But this does result in no access, and therefore the focus for trans people would be providing only mental health services and not medical transition stuff like hormones and surgeries. Basically, if trans is classified as a lifestyle choice, then there's no Equalities Act protection for it. But, of course, the TERF-driven government does want to look at expanding same-sex protections in the Equalities Act. This country is a mess. Trans pride is more necessary than ever. But what I'm trying to say is, if the biological, medicalized model of gender fails to completely explain it, then where do we turn next? In my previous video about this topic, imagining gender as a spectrum, which, yes, I understand the drawings are messy, but gender is a messy point to try and explain, so that's why. I broke down gender into 3 distinct categories. Identity, which is internal and happens on the individual level. Presentation, which is external but happens on the individual level. And roles, which are external and happen on the societal level. Now, I do want to focus on the identity thing first and then come back to the other 2 later. In the Dr. Phil clip, you have the trans advocates whose names are Addison Rose Vincent and Ethan Alexander Patron. I'm not sure I'm saying that correctly, but often I just saw them called the trans, like the transgenders, the trans advocates. Like, get it together. These people have names. Let's use them. And let's shout them out some love, because they did as good a job as they could, given the circumstances. Let's just take a moment to break down what happened. So, from their perspective, they were there on the Dr. Phil show to talk about pronouns. They were ambushed by the notorious transphobe and right-winger Matt Walsh, And they got sucked into doing the thing that most trans people don't want to do, which is debate our identities, as if that's a valid thing to fucking debate or discuss. Like, we don't want to do that, because it puts in frame the fact that you could question or suggest that there is some sort of valid debate around a person's deeply held identity. Like, that's really not a great way to go about it. And again, from what I have researched, from what I understand from them, they felt like they were ambushed by not only Matt Walsh, but also by the Dr. Phil production team. It's funny how their response after the whole incident has been, we're not happy about this. While Matt Walsh has been touting his grand success about owning the libs and, you know, the gender ideologues tearing down the narrative and blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry, I think that all of this bluster and bravado kind of is masking a bit of he doth protest too much, because although I watched the clip, and although I think that there were times when Addison and Ethan didn't really do the best job that they could have done, that is because they were unprepared for such a thing. When it came to explaining their points, Walsh also didn't come out looking like the great victor, the great debater, the succeeding. No, he had just as many awkward moments as they did. And he's pretty much made a career out of trashing on trans people. So what does that tell you? Anyway, they didn't have a really great answer to the question, what is a woman? Because they are both non-binary and didn't really want to address answering the question in a way that might seem not genuine or speaking over actual women or anything like that. But eventually they were prompted into saying, you know, their basic claim of gender is that a woman is anyone who genuinely identifies as a woman, which is true enough, but is an unsatisfactory answer when it comes to not just the TERFs, because, you know, you're not going to appease them anyway, but also the average person watching might not be convinced by that. And many people can see the sort of instant holes in this explanation. It invites criticism in the form of 2015's attack helicopter meme format. And of course that is the basis for Walsh's transphobic children's book in the first place. Of course, he doesn't make the distinction between pretending and identifying, but that's definitely not on Addison or Ethan. Putting aside the asinine nature of that particular criticism, because even internal identity as a signifier of one's gender, well, it must be sincerely held, which was the point of the trans people, and kind of not addressed by the TERFs or the transphobes. However, how can you know what's in someone else's head? Or for that matter, your own? It takes some trans people years or even decades just to figure out that they're trans and what their identity is and everything. So if identity is confusing and biology is out because, you know, biological sex is not the same thing as gender, like, because as most sociologists and psychologists and psychological bodies keep reiterating, well, that leaves performativity theory, which is where I come back to the other two parts of identifying gender, the presentation and the social roles. I'm going to lump those two together in this particular label. Performative theory outlines that gender is a mixture of individual presentation and gendered actions or social roles. This would seem to make the most sense, at least from a societal point of view. Despite the fact that anyone of any gender can do most of these performances, i.e. present in a certain gendered way or wear a particular item of clothing, like anyone can wear a shirt, anyone can wear a skirt, anyone can be a bricklayer, anyone can be a doctor, anyone can be a nurse. Like, just because these things have inherent gendered histories behind them doesn't mean that it's impossible for people of other genders to do those things. And, gender non-conforming people exist, is what I'm trying to say. Generally speaking, of course, men are masculine and women are feminine. I know, big revelation, right? But just like with biology, these trends of traits of what counts as masculine and feminine tend to clump together in sort of a bimodal distribution, but they are by no means definitive. However, man, woman, and non-binary still exist as social categories. You can't tell a person's biology just by looking. You can't tell what my chromosomes are right now. I can, pretty much have a good guess and, I've got a 99% chance of being right. But I don't know for certain unless I've had a blood test to determine my genetics, my DNA, my chromosomes. Like, how would I know? How would you know? And that's why social cues, such as appearance and roles, are necessary to explain gender. These signifiers relay an idea of what is going on with a person. I get treated like a woman because I appear as a woman. And that's not always a good thing. I get talked down to by men. I get treated as stupid by certain men. I also get a sense of female camaraderie amongst other women. So it's not all bad. But based on the way I look and act, I get seen as a woman. So does that make me a woman? Well, no, I'm non-binary. I've said as much many times before. And the truth is that in answering this question, there are no simple, clear-cut answers here. And the truth lies somewhere in the interplay of all three of these theories: biological, identity, and performativity. Which, by the way, in case you missed it, was the message of the video by ContraPoints called The Aesthetic. I know that garnered a lot of controversial discourse because people were thinking that Natalie was trying to say something about one of those three things being definitive and the only way to accurately define gender. It wasn't. It was the fact that all three play a part in explaining gender without falling on one side or another of the argument. So what is a woman? Well, it is hard to say. But if someone says they are one, it's probably best to believe them and move on. Because these discussions, these ideas, these arguments, they get considered over and over again by trans people ourselves in our heads until we reach the conclusion that we need to accurately describe ourselves. And trust me, reaching that conclusion is not easy. But once we've found our truth, we do not feel like discussing and debating it with doubt-filled turfs. And we shouldn't have to. Anyway, that's all from me on this topic. So, I'll see you next time. And until then, non-binary is valid. God damn it. Bye. Performative theory outlines that gender is a mixture of... I can't read my writing. Oh my God. Individual. Yeah. We're looking at something... Oh God, that wobbled.